Good morning. I'd ask everybody to take their seats. We're going to actually get started on the 32nd United Nations International Day of Older Persons, the first in-person commemoration since 2019. So I thank you all for coming here despite the rain, etc., joining us in person, and to all those who are online, we welcome you just as heartily. So it's a very, very special day, but I do want to give some housekeeping points before we start. For those that are in the room, please silence your phones. And if you're using the smartphone translation, please use your earpods. Use of masks are recommended. Bathroom facilities are on the 3rd floor going out through the back. And if you're a social media user, please post about today's event. So it's now my pleasure to have this opportunity to introduce Dr. Cynthia Stewin, who will provide welcoming remarks. Dr. Stewin has spent her entire career in the field of aging, leading prominent community organizations that serve older persons and those with visual impairment. She's published works in the area of vision, sensory loss, and environmental access, and presented at countless local, state, national, international meetings and events addressing the structural inequities that impact the quality of life of older persons and the cumulative disadvantage that's especially experienced by older women. She's the main representative to the United Nations on behalf of the International Federation on Aging and is chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York. There's more, but in the interest in time, I will just leave with Dr. Stewin is a fierce advocate for the rights for the Convention of Older Persons. Dr. Stewin, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the 32nd observance of the International Day of Older Persons at the United Nations. Isn't it wonderful to be back in person? It's great. And we're delighted that this live web TV, UN Web TV broadcast is available to all our friends and colleagues around the globe. And especially I want to welcome the Committee on Aging, our counterpart in Vienna and Geneva, as they're watching along today too. The NGO Committee on Aging is grateful to all our sponsors today. Argentina has been our sponsor for many years of this very special day, as well as the group of Friends of Older Persons in New York. And none of it would also happen without the leadership of the DESA Program on Aging team under Amal Abu Rafi's direct leadership. Thank you, Amal, Masumi, your whole team. It's just phenomenal. But we are also very grateful for our financial sponsors for today. Please thank AARP, Emblem Health, M&T Bank, and Seroptimus International. Many thanks. The theme this year of UNIDOP, the resilience of older persons in a changing world. And we're highlighting here in New York the contributions of older women. And here's why. The latest data by the United Nations show that because of the female advantage in life expectancy, women outnumber men at older ages in almost every population in the world. This year, women comprise 55.7% of persons age 65 or older. And globally, women make up 62% of persons over the age of 80. It is therefore imperative that member states incorporate gender equality in all aspects of community life as envisioned in the Sustainable Development Goal 5 on gender equality. Recognition of the vital contributions of older women and the meaningful inclusion of their voices, perspectives, and needs is critical in helping us to build resilient societies in a changing world, especially since the Global Agenda 30 is now more important than ever. A few weeks ago, the Secretary General, in his address to the General Assembly, said that we face a world in peril, from the pandemic to conflicts, from climate change to poverty, inequality, and hunger. These effects continue to be significant, particularly for many older women who bear the burden of the cumulative disadvantage over the life course. The added intersection of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, national or social origin exacerbate that risk of gender inequality and discrimination in later life. It has been 20 years since the General Assembly endorsed the political declaration and the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, and we look forward to conclusions of its global fourth review and appraisal. But from what we have seen so far in the outcomes of the regional reviews is that the challenges seem to remain the same: lack of political will, lack of financial and human resources, lack of data availability, and gaps between policy and practice. All of this against a backdrop in a world where half of the people in it, according to the United Nations Global Report on Aging, hold ageist views against older persons. We need to do better. What is even more concerning is that as the world is emerging from a pandemic which took the lives of over 12 million older persons worldwide within the 24-month period, the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, and just the last 2 weeks, the UN General Assembly leaders had little to say about older persons, but rather the main focus was on youth. We're not against youth, and we certainly are not pitting one age group against the other. In addressing the universal value of leave no one behind, it must be recognized that older persons need not reduce attention for youth because we're all aging at the same rate. And we certainly want all our young people to grow old. We have been saying for many years, and yet there seems to be a strategic myopia. Let me give you a recent example. UN Women and DESA Statistics Division just released the Gender Snapshot 2022. It is the report that presents the latest evidence on gender equality across all 17 global goals. In highlighting the current pace of progress in achieving this gender equality, there was not one single mention of older women. Quite mind-blowing when we know that 8 out of 10 of the 6 million women who died in the pandemic were older women. We have to do better. We must do better, and we can do better. This year, we're providing a platform for multi-stakeholders to come together for a call to action to stop overlooking older women. Today, we will hear from governments, representatives from civil society, and United Nations experts about the contributions, strengths, resourcefulness, and humanity of older women. As 159 governments agreed at the Second World Assembly on Aging 20 years ago that older persons must be full participants in the development process and not be denied the opportunity to share in the benefits. But we cannot enjoy a life of fulfillment, health, security, and active participation in the economic, social, cultural, and political lives of our societies if we are shut out. To work towards this goal, it is necessary to remove whatever excludes or discriminates against us, and we believe that an international, legally binding instrument can expedite our path to that goal. So today, we hope this program will highlight the resilience that older women have faced in their economic, socioeconomic, environmental, health, and lifelong inequities in spite of them, to raise awareness of the many vital and valuable contributions older women already make, which should compete for the public and policymakers' attention now. Thank you. Now, on to our speakers. Please note that there are brief bio sketches in your program available in the packets here in the UN as well as online. So I will not belabor any long bios, but rather let you read them. But first, let's listen to a video message from His Excellency Antonio Gutierrez, the UN Secretary General, who has prepared this video message for us today. Let's listen.
On this International Day of Older Persons, we focus attention on the resilience of the more than 1 million older women and men in a changing world. The past years have witnessed dramatic upheavals, and older people often found themselves at the epicenter of crisis. They are particularly vulnerable to a range of challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the worsening climate crisis, proliferating conflicts, and growing poverty. Yet, in the face of these threats, older people have inspired us with that remarkable resilience. By 2030, 1.4 billion people will be at least 60 years old. Our task as societies and as the global community is to address the challenges of longevity and unleash its potential. We must promote the social, economic, and political inclusion of all people at all stages. This pledge is enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals. Lifelong learning, strong social protection, accessible quality long-term health care, bridging the digital divide, intergenerational support, dignity, and respect are essential. Older persons are a tremendous source of knowledge and experience. We must strive to ensure their active engagement, full participation, and essential contribution to our societies. Together, let us build more inclusive and age-friendly societies and a more resilient world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, and let's all take that message to heart. A very, very good one about a very inclusive society and age-friendly. Ambassador Maria del Carmen Scaff is the permanent representative of Argentina to the United Nations and provides tremendous leadership to not only the open-ended working group on aging, but also as vice chair of the UN Women and the Commission on the Status of Women. As I said earlier, Argentina has been a pioneering champion for older persons and for human rights, and very supportive of the NGO Committee on Aging, New York especially. Thank you so much, Your Excellency. Welcome for opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Really, para nosotros realmente es un honor estar hoy aquí y un honor especialmente de poderme encontrar físicamente con la mayoría de ustedes que hemos estado trabajando más de 2 años y medio de manera virtual. La verdad que realmente es muy importante podernos ver y en algunos casos ha sido un impacto muy, muy fuerte. Excelencias, colegas, amigos y amigas, me parece que hay un problema con la interpretación. Me gustaría si podemos resolverlo, porque me parece que no están escuchando la interpretación. ¿Me equivoco? Es una aplicación. ¿Podemos explicar cómo es la aplicación para que puedan seguir lo que decimos? ¿Estamos aquí? Acá, perfecto. Entonces, ahora sí. Excelencias, colegas, amigos y amigas, me gustaría comenzar agradeciendo y felicitando al Comité de ONG sobre Envejecimiento y al Departamento de Asuntos Económicos y Sociales de las Naciones Unidas por su gran esfuerzo en la organización de este evento tan importante. Es un honor haber sido invitada a pronunciar estas palabras de bienvenida Este año, el Día Internacional de las Personas Mayores hace un llamado a la comunidad internacional para que considere la resiliencia de las personas mayores y sus aportes a nuestras comunidades, destacando las contribuciones de las mujeres mayores. Es innegable que las personas mayores son titulares de derechos que pueden contribuir significativamente al desarrollo social, económico y sostenible de nuestras sociedades. En este sentido, es fundamental empoderarlas plenamente y promover su participación efectiva y significativa. Como presidenta del Grupo de Trabajo de Composición Abierta sobre Envejecimiento y vicepresidenta en representación de los países del GRULAC, de la Mesa Directiva de la Junta Ejecutiva de ONU Mujeres, resalto la importancia del tema de esta conmemoración del Día Internacional de las Personas Mayores, que pone el foco en las mujeres adultas mayores, quienes históricamente han sido ignoradas en los debates sobre mujeres y niñas que se llevan a cabo en diferentes foros multilaterales. Como muchos de ustedes saben, la mayoría de las personas mayores son mujeres. Las mujeres superamos en número a los hombres en edades más avanzadas en casi todas las poblaciones como resultado de nuestra ventaja, si se puede decir así, en la esperanza de vida. A nivel mundial, las mujeres representan el 55,7% de las personas de 65 años o más en este año 2022. Las mujeres mayores enfrentan diversos desafíos. Ellas deben enfrentar formas múltiples e interrelacionadas de discriminación y desigualdades a lo largo de su vida, las cuales se agravan en la vejez. Asimismo, deben hacer frente a la inseguridad económica, en mayor medida que los hombres mayores. Son más vulnerables a la violencia, al abandono, al abuso y a la exclusión social. Sin embargo, a pesar de estos grandes desafíos en procura de tratar de resolver o ayudar a resolver algunos de estos problemas, las mujeres mayores son un pilar de nuestras sociedades. Si bien las personas mayores a menudo son descritas como dependientes y receptoras de cuidados, muchas mujeres mayores en realidad brindan trabajos de cuidados no remunerados a otras personas mayores y miembros de sus familias. Y esto a menudo no se reconoce. Durante la pandemia de COVID-19, más de la mitad de las mujeres mayores, el 57%, o sea, mayores de 60 años o más, informaron que dedicaron más tiempo al trabajo doméstico y de cuidados no remunerados. En muchos países, los abuelos, y en especial las abuelas, juegan un papel crucial para permitir que sus hijos e hijas trabajen brindando apoyo en el cuidado de sus nietos y nietas. Las proyecciones indican que el porcentaje de mujeres mayores que participan en la fuerza laboral aumentará constantemente. Se necesitan más y mejores datos para capturar no solo los desafíos, sino también las muchas formas en que las mujeres mayores contribuyen a nuestras sociedades y las fortalecen. Por otra parte, quisiera destacar que para Argentina es una prioridad que los derechos de las mujeres mayores sean abordados en los foros de cuestiones de género de Naciones Unidas, como la Comisión sobre la Condición Jurídica y Social de la Mujer. Esperamos que en la próxima resolución sobre programa de trabajo plurianual sea incluido el abordaje de la situación de las mujeres mayores, ya que en años anteriores hemos analizado la situación de otros grupos de mujeres invisibilizadas, como por ejemplo las mujeres rurales. Es hora que este tema tenga la prioridad que se merece, y esto depende de nosotros, de los Estados miembros, pero también de las autoridades de Naciones Unidas. Antes de concluir, quisiera reiterar el compromiso inquebrantable de Argentina con la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos de todas las personas mayores. Hacemos un llamado a todos los Estados miembros y a la comunidad internacional a redoblar nuestros esfuerzos para avanzar en el desarrollo de un instrumento internacional jurídicamente vinculante para garantizar el pleno disfrute de los derechos humanos y la dignidad de todas las personas mayores en todos los rincones del mundo. Pero este discurso estaría limitado si lo termino aquí. Quiero hacer 2 reconocimientos. Primero, justamente a la sociedad civil. Estos 2 años y medio no hubiese sido posible mantener vigente el tema sin el accionar de la sociedad civil. Muchísimas gracias por ello. Y también a la experta independiente, la señora Mahler. La señora Mahler hizo una presentación especialmente focalizada en vivienda la semana pasada, jueves o viernes de la semana pasada. Esa presentación es sumamente valiosa. Los puntos allí destacados, justamente de cómo se encuentran las personas mayores en relación a la vivienda, fundamental para poder vivir la cotidianidad, máxime si somos mayores, que es realmente un gran aporte. Los invito entonces a unirse a nosotros este día especial para celebrar la resiliencia y la contribución de las mujeres mayores y para apoyar esta oportunidad para que ellas puedan alzar sus voces. Muchas gracias.
And muchas gracias. We have our work laid out, and we have a strong advocate here for older women and the interface that is so important that we work on within, without, right? Well, muchas gracias. I was looking forward to welcoming the new ambassador to the UN from Chile, Paula Navarez, but she fell ill. So we are not able to welcome her this year. But we have someone who is not a stranger to our midst, and the Deputy Permanent Representative of Chile, Renee Ruiz-Diaz. And I am so pleased that you could be with us today and representing not only Chile, but the group of friends of older persons who have been strong supporters of our work for many years. So, Your Excellency.
Muy buenos días. Muchas gracias, Cynthia. Me hago eco de todo lo que se ha dicho aquí antes de nuestra intervención. El saludo de la embajadora Paula Narváez, que quería mucho estar acá. La verdad que agradecemos al Comité de ONGs por el envejecimiento, haber organizado este día y darle visibilidad a este tema. Ya vemos de las exposiciones que hay mucho que hacer y muchas gracias a la sociedad civil. Chile participa con entusiasmo de este evento, ya que no solo, como fue señalado, encabezamos el grupo de amigos de las personas mayores, sino que también el gobierno del presidente Gabriel Boric ha anunciado que Chile tendrá una política exterior feminista. La intersección de la edad y el género es un tema muy importante para nosotros. Al mismo tiempo, hemos reconocido que este vínculo a menudo es pasado por alto entre las prioridades de la agenda multilateral. Por ello, en el marco del Día Internacional de las Personas Mayores, Chile quiere reconocer la inmensa contribución de las mujeres adultas mayores a nuestras sociedades, así como celebrar su diversidad. Es nuestra intención abogar por la igualdad de género y el empoderamiento de todas las mujeres y niñas de todas las edades, como un elemento clave para la implementación efectiva y acelerada de la Declaración y Plataforma de Acción de Beijing y la Agenda 2030 para el Desarrollo Sostenible. Con este mismo objetivo consideramos necesario aportar una perspectiva de género a los programas relacionados con el Plan de Acción Internacional de Madrid sobre el envejecimiento, así como a la implementación de la década del envejecimiento saludable. En este sentido, agradecemos particularmente a la experta independiente sobre los derechos de las personas mayores, señora Claudia Mahler, la publicación del informe Los derechos humanos de las mujeres mayores, la intersección entre el envejecimiento y el género el año pasado. No solo las mujeres constituyen la mayoría de las personas mayores, como ha sido dicho, sino que la proporción de mujeres mayores en la población femenina mundial también aumentará en los próximos años. Por lo tanto, no podemos hablar de proteger, promover y cumplir y respetar los derechos humanos de todas las mujeres y niñas si no nos aseguramos que las políticas y los programas aborden sus necesidades a lo largo de la vida y en particular cuando envejecen. Por lo tanto, debemos redoblar nuestros esfuerzos para proteger a las mujeres mayores de todas las formas de violencia y discriminación, en particular porque 1 de cada 6 mujeres es víctima de la violencia en la tercera edad. Además, a medida que las mujeres envejecen, experimentan una serie de problemas de salud relacionados con la salud sexual y reproductiva. Así, las mujeres en esta etapa vital continúan siendo sujetos de derecho en el ámbito de la salud sexual y reproductiva, requiriendo una atención específica. Por lo tanto, nuestros sistemas de salud deberían incluir la edad en sus enfoques con perspectiva de género para abordar dichas necesidades. Empoderar a las mujeres de todas las edades significa abordar la intersección entre la discriminación basada en edad y el género, que produce formas únicas de desigualdad, incluyendo estereotipos negativos que combinan el edadismo y el sexismo. Para ello tenemos que cambiar la forma de pensar en el envejecimiento y cuestionar nuestras propias narrativas sobre el papel que pueden desempeñar las mujeres adultas mayores en la economía, en las sociedades y en los hogares. Teniendo en cuenta que para el año 2030 las poblaciones mayores superarán a las más jóvenes, las personas mayores y aún más las mujeres mayores siguen siendo en gran medida invisibles y desatendidas en el desarrollo de políticas y programas. Esto puede lograrse, entre otras cosas, recopilando y desagregando sistemáticamente los datos por edad y género, así como recopilando y analizando particularmente los datos de las mujeres más allá de la edad reproductiva. La situación de las mujeres adultas mayores en este contexto merece mayor atención de la comunidad internacional, sobre todo teniendo en cuenta que ya tienen más probabilidades que los hombres de vivir en la pobreza. A menudo también soportan una considerable carga de los cuidados no remunerados y del trabajo doméstico, lo que contribuye a lo que se denomina la feminización de la pobreza. Para lograr la igualdad de género necesitamos la participación plena, igualitaria y significativa de las mujeres adultas mayores en la vida pública y en la toma de decisiones, que siguen siendo discriminadas y excluidas de la misma. Para hacer frente a esto es importante tener un enfoque sensible a la edad y el género en los sistemas de protección social, así como sus respectivas políticas, planes y estrategias de protección social. La resiliencia de las mujeres adultas mayores puede fomentarse, entre otras cosas, invirtiendo en la educación permanente, la alfabetización digital y fomentando la inclusión social. No se puede tampoco menoscabar el rol de las disposiciones normativas para proteger, promover y respetar los derechos de las mujeres adultas mayores, lo cual es clave para asegurar su autonomía y su independencia. Terminando, en el marco de este día importante, Chile reitera su compromiso con una agenda multilateral que refleje las necesidades de las y los adultos mayores y también con la transversalización de las perspectivas de género en todo el trabajo de Naciones Unidas. Un trabajo para el cual la colaboración de Estados miembros, agencias y con la sociedad civil es clave. Muchas gracias.
And muchas gracias también. We have much work to do with the group of friends and with Chile and with Argentina and the open-ended working group. We must get busy, right? We're ready to stand here and do what you need done from civil society. So thank you, thank you. Each year, the Executive Committee of the NGO Committee on Aging appoints a chair for the UN International Day of Older Person observance here at the UN. And this year, it seemed most fitting to select our chair of our subcommittee on older women, Robin Fenley. Dr. Fenley has executed this task extremely well when she had none of us had been live for 3 years. So it was quite a learning curve. And she did this all the while juggling her 2 teaching at both Fordham and Hunter all along the way. So we're very grateful that she managed to fit us in, and it was often at midnight. But anyway, it really is a wonderful team of people that she pulled together on the planning committee to work with her, and of course with Dessa. But to our UNIDOP chair extraordinaire, Robin Fenley.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. It was different, I'll give you that. But as anybody who's done any sort of event planning, an event like this doesn't happen without a group of dedicated and committed individuals. Moving from idea to reality. And as Cynthia said, the planning committee came out of our NGO Committee on Aging. So on this committee, I'd like to acknowledge Cynthia Stewin, Erica Dar, Magda Kazmarska, Anna Stauber, and Maud Bruce About, happily taking on this enormous task from the beginning. And while these women are formidable in and of themselves, these best ideas wouldn't have seen the light of day if it weren't for the consistent and persistent help of our colleagues from UN's Department of Economic and Social Affairs, specifically Amal Abu Rafa, Chateau Nfila, Claudia Altavas, and Julia Ferre. Critically important to the success of this event has been the technical mastery of Amin Lamrabat, sitting there in the middle, and the BCSS team that allows this event to be heard, translated, and transmitted. In order to reduce the barriers to participation, thanks to Interprenet for their translation assistance and to All Hands in Motion for providing American Sign Language. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the many volunteers who helped everyone get in this room with security-approved badges and directions. Magda and volunteers, thank you so much for providing this critical service. And also a shout out to Frances Zinedine. So thank you for appearing wherever and whenever needed. So huge thanks to everyone there. Actually, yes, thanks to all of you. Yeah, very much. And it's now my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Annette Franke, board chair of AARP, who has some really powerful thoughts and ideas to share with us. As a native of Puerto Rico, Ms. Franke is the first Hispanic to hold this position. The AARP board is integral in its approval of strategic direction for the organization, as well as oversight of management's execution of those strategic goals. As board chair, Annette is frequently invited to speak on financial security in retirement, financial literacy, caregiving, brain health, disparities in health and its impact on financial security, and the empowerment of women and girls, among other issues. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA from Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. And now, Annette Franke.
DESA, the government of Argentina, the government of Chile, and the sponsors for inviting me to speak to you today. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen joining us from all around the world. It is an honor to speak to you as we celebrate the 32nd UN International Day of Older Persons. Today, it is vital that we focus on the status of older women, as many of the people that have spoken before me have said. Their successes, their struggles, and their dreams for a better future. While a large part of my remarks today concerns older women in the US, I certainly recognize that in many other countries, older women can face much greater challenges and higher obstacles to equality and security. AARP's Office of International Affairs seeks to help people live longer, healthier, more financially secure, and productive lives by identifying and sharing the best ideas and practices on key policy issues. We convene a wide range of experts from around the world to share their knowledge on health, long-term care, older workers, financial security, retirement income, and livable communities. Like all of you, however, I look at the subject of older women not only from a conceptual or a policy perspective, but also from a very personal lens. In preparing for today, I thought about my two grandmothers. Both stayed at home. One raised 8 children and lost her husband early on, but there was always food on the table, and all of the children went on to lead very productive lives. The other one also stayed at home and raised 3 children with her husband, but she was ahead of her time. She practiced yoga and meditation, read books on positive thinking and self-help, and even learned to play the accordion and the piano as an adult. Both of my grandmothers taught me important lessons about pursuing happiness, but also about the grit it takes to move forward. Interestingly, although both were born in the early 1900s and lived all their lives in Puerto Rico, both lived well into their 90s and were really healthy until the time they passed. In the generations that followed them, that grit, that resilience empowered us to create both loving families and successful careers. Today, I think as well of so many other grandmothers providing boundless love and life lessons for their families, providing sustenance, and in many cases working multiple jobs and taking care of their grandchildren. And I think about the older women around the world who are driving positive change in science, medicine, education, in protecting the environment and rebuilding neighborhoods. This positive thinking propelling older women's achievements was also found in a survey that AARP and National Geographic conducted earlier this year. AARP's Chief Public Policy Officer, Deb Whitman, who many of you know, described the results this way. Most people are optimistic about aging and do not see it as a bad thing. People in their 70s and 80s are uplifting examples of resilience because they become more realistic about the changes that happen and are more likely to be happy. All quite true, and yet we also recognize, as you do, the corrosive effect of gender stereotypes and ageism, especially when these two are put together. We know, as you do, the resilience cannot always defeat repression, and that discrimination, whether shouted, softly stated, or unspoken, still stifles so many women's hopes and dreams. Age discrimination takes a substantial toll on economic growth. AARP research shows that age discrimination cost the U.S. $850 billion in lost productivity in 2018. And this figure can rise to $3.9 trillion by 2050 if we do nothing. A third of this cost is attributed to women being involuntarily let go of the labor market. At AARP, we are optimistic, but we are also realistic. Today, in the United States, women earn 82 cents for every dollar men make, and that is much worse for minorities. This pay gap is closing, but at a rate where it would take many, many decades to fully close, and that is just not acceptable. The private sector needs to work much faster to close this gender pay gap, where progress has been painfully slow. The pay gap often starts with the first job, then persists over time. With lower incomes, women have a harder time saving for the future. Women are more likely to take time off the workforce or pass up promotions or other opportunities so they can raise children or take care of aging spouses or aging parents, and at many times, all at the same time. Every month with no paycheck or a smaller paycheck translates into lower savings and lower Social Security benefits, which are based on lifetime earnings. Yet women, on average, live longer than men and have higher healthcare costs in retirement. The pandemic has only intensified this problem. Women were more likely to leave the workforce during the pandemic for caregiving purposes, with huge implications on their financial security. And this development has been particularly acute for women minorities. So what are we doing? At AARP, we support expanding access to paid leave and other workplace policies that assist family caregivers. We also support a tax credit for family caregivers to help offset their out-of-pocket expenses. We are fighting for age discrimination so that older workers and job seekers can continue their careers and find new jobs. Age is usually, and sadly, a missing link in the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations. Only a very small percentage of companies include age in their DEI statements. At this time when ESG movement has taken off around the world, companies should include age in their ESG metrics and their mindset as they describe and pursue social goals. We need to build, support, and sustain a multi-generational workforce. That is the mission of the Living, Learning, and Earning Longer Collaborative, developed by AARP in partnership with the World Economic Forum and OECD, which brings together more than 70 global employers to share and discuss new research to help employers build that inclusive multi-gen workforce. We are making it easier to save for retirement through the adoption of work and save plans in many states, in which workers have a vehicle to save part of their paycheck. And at AARP Foundation, our Work for Yourself at 50 Plus program helps older adults, mostly women, explore self-employment options to increase their financial stability. We see in this program so many wonderful examples of resilience and reinvention. In terms of what has to change, I would add another aspect of financial empowerment where progress is badly needed. As someone who works in finance, I am appalled by the fact that only 2% of venture capital in the US last year went to women founders. That absolutely has to change. Something else has to change as well, closing the gender divide in STEM and internet use. Globally, only 30% of STEM workers are women, and less women use the internet than men. Everyone loses out when girls and women are discouraged from entering STEM fields. What discoveries are we precluding when we narrow the pipeline to STEM? And what are we all losing when the enthusiasm, the sense of invincibility of a 7 or 9-year-old girl for math or science or any other field fades away, replaced by self-doubt and a ceiling on her dreams? As we celebrate the contributions of older women, we also need to clear away the obstacles that so many women of all ages face. Here at the UN, as I think about the many challenges facing older women around the world, I think about a speech given by the person who coined the term United Nations and was instrumental in its founding, President Franklin Roosevelt. I should add that his wife, Eleanor, was a stunning example of self-empowerment. President Roosevelt, in his 4 Freedoms speech, set forth 4 principles that, with some adaptation, can help light our way today as we work for gender equality. I am indebted to AARP CEO Joanne Jenkins for the idea of re-envisioning the 4 freedoms as she did in her best-selling book, Disrupt Aging. She cited the freedom to choose how you want to live as you age, the freedom to earn, the freedom to learn, and the freedom to pursue happiness. Keeping that thoughtful model for aging in mind, I'd like to put forward an adaptation of President Roosevelt's 4 freedoms in this UN setting, especially as they pertain to older women. The first freedom he cited was freedom of speech. While we tend to take that right for granted in the United States, we know that in many countries it is denied, often in a brutal fashion. At the same time, I think we also need to look at speech from a broader perspective today when it comes to older women. The question is not only whether we can speak out, but where and who is really listening. Women are often the subject of flowery language or flattery, but we're not asking for a place on a pedestal. We just want, in fact, we insist upon a seat at the table where decisions are made. As the line from the play Hamilton goes, older women need to be in the room where it happens. Women drive more than 80% of the spending in the US, but when it comes to political decisions, we're often put in the passenger seat or in the back seat. Older women need a seat at the table when decisions are made on healthcare, financial security, protecting the environment, and so much more. The next freedom President Roosevelt discussed was freedom of worship. Here we need to consider ways in which religion and culture can be weaponized against women. We see the tragic consequences, for example, in Afghanistan and Iran. President Roosevelt also spoke of freedom from want. Here we need to strengthen the financial security of older women, not only by policies that assist those who are vulnerable in their later years, but by helping them build financial security throughout their lifespan. The final freedom President Roosevelt spoke of was freedom from fear. Violence against women around the globe demands much greater attention and much better data to understand its scope and to help prevent it. Did you know that older women are often excluded from research on gender-based violence and protection services? With a cutoff of age of 49 in the Demographic Health Survey, we are lacking basic information on violence against older women. Empowerment of girls and women is not a zero-sum proposition. It is a 21st century imperative that is good for everyone. As we take on the formidable challenges from poverty to racial injustice to climate change, we can't exclude more than half of the world's population from creating and carrying out the solutions. Older women have so much to contribute in every country. We can't afford to cast aside their hard-won wisdom and experience or to overlook the basic needs of those who are vulnerable or the basic human rights of every woman. I leave you with this quote from Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first woman president of Liberia and Nobel Peace Prize winner. Increasingly, there is recognition that full gender equity will ensure a stronger economy, a more developed nation, a more peaceful nation, and that is why we must continue to work. I am blessed that my grandmothers looked beyond the horizon to create a better life for the generations that follow them. That generous spirit and wide field of vision are what we all need to summon today as women around the world pursue our dreams, look out for each other, and call upon men to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. That really was moving. And before the ambassadors leave, I would like to thank you very much for your participation this morning, Deputy Permanent Representative. You all, and with our keynote, Annette Franke, have really added much to have for discussion today. It is so much grist for the mill to move from thought to action. So thank you so very much. And so now, great, we've got our panel on its way up. And Alana, officer, if you could join us from Geneva, zooming in. So we're in for a real special session with this panel of experts from around the globe. Each brings their unique experience and expertise to the table that's going to help us deepen our understanding of the barriers and challenges that are faced throughout the lifespan of women everywhere. The resilience of older women and their contributions to family, community, and nation in the face of obstacles will be highlighted and expanded upon. Introducing the panelists and leading the moderated discussion is Ramsey Alwyn, President and CEO of the National Council on Aging here in the U.S. She's played a critical role in broadening the understanding and measurement of economic security and older persons at the highest levels of U.S. government. Ms. Alwyn is currently spearheading an initiative in the U.S. for major aging organizations to reframe aging. That is, to work toward a more inclusive society. This is clearly a repeating theme that we're going to be hearing here today. We at the NGO Committee on Aging New York are pleased to have her also as a member of our executive committee. Before I hand the floor over to Ramsey, those who are in the audience, in your packet, there's a little index card. If you happen to have any questions that comes from the panel, please write them. We'll have volunteers collect them, and then we'll give them to Ramsey to Yeah, and when you are, if you have a question, hold them up high for the volunteers to see. Okay, Ramsey, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I'm so honored to join you all today. Ramsey Alwyn and I lead the National Council on Aging, where we've been working for over 70 years to improve the lives of older adults and ensure equitable aging for all. We're truly on a mission to do so. Just in this last year, we measurably improved the lives of over 6 million older adults, 70% of which were women. So today's theme of resilience of older persons and the contributions of older women, it's on display for us every day at NCOA. And given what we see, the struggles older women experience, we believe it's so very important to elevate aging as a woman's issue, to elevate aging and aging well as the social justice issue we know it to be. It's an absolute privilege to moderate today's discussion with an impressive set of panelists we have here, accomplished and passionate about these various themes. To get us started, I'll introduce each panelist in the order they'll share remarks, and then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, so be sure to put put your questions on those index cards. So let me go ahead and get started. Each panelist will have about 5 to 7 minutes to share their overview. We'll start with Claudia Maller. Claudia is the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. What a fantastic title. Her appointment in 2020 couldn't have been more timely as the pandemic wreaked havoc on all of us, but especially older adults. And recently acknowledged by the World Health Organization among the top 50 experts on healthy aging. We're so pleased to have Claudia with us today. Then we'll hear from Lorena Aguilar, Executive Director of the Kaschak Institute for Social Justice for Women and Girls at Binghamton University. Lorena has spent over 3 decades providing strategic contributions to national and international policy, with field experience from over 50 countries, from Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, Eastern Europe, and Asia. Then, joining us via Zoom, we'll have Alana Officer, Head of Unit Demographic Change and Healthy Aging at the World Health Organization. Alana coordinates the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, including WHO's efforts on age-friendly and the global campaign to combat ageism. Thank you for joining us virtually, Alana. Then I'll share remarks from Bilquis Tahara. Bilquis is the Executive Director of the Shirakat Partnership for Development in Pakistan. Unfortunately, due to the floods and the devastation in Pakistan, as well as challenges with visas, she's unable to join us in person, but has put together a thoughtful set of written remarks that I'll share. Given her work as a feminist and activist and over 3 decades of leading women's movements in Pakistan, we're so pleased to bring her insights and perspective to today's conversation. Carol will then have you close out our conversation. Carol Agengo is the Global Initiatives Lead at Help Age International, overseeing the entire Africa region. She brings with her human rights and gender expert experience. Among her many notables, she led the Equality Now effort in the delivery of a compelling advocacy initiative for the appointment of a special rapporteur on the laws that discriminate against women. Bringing that expertise to the intersection of sexism and ageism is so very critical. So we're pleased to have you here with us today to share just that. So wonderful and robust this conversation will be. We hope to include your thoughts as well. So again, take a moment as you're listening, go ahead and capture your questions on those index cards, and they'll make their way to me. But let's go ahead and get started, Claudia.
So thank you so much for the warm welcome. And first of all, let me also thank the organizers for inviting me to be here today, the NGO Committee on Aging. It is an honor for me, really, to be part of this high-level panel, and I will highlight the human rights, as you can imagine, through a gender lens and in the context of socioeconomic aspects. The Human Rights Council created the mandate of the independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons in 2013 to examine and report on developments and challenges in the realization of the human rights of older persons worldwide, including a gender perspective. Since my appointment in May 2020, which you already mentioned, I have made consistent efforts to ensure that the voices of older women are reflected in my work, especially in addressing the human rights of older women. In my second report to the General Assembly, examined the intersection between aging and gender, which I presented in 2021. What is evident is that women have a cumulative disadvantage in their access to the labor market as well to the fulfillment of their right to social security because of lower labor force participation, the gender pay gap, interrupted employment patterns due to caregiving, and higher prevalence of part-time and informal work means that older women often receive lower or no pensions. Women represent 65% of those without any regular pension. And we all already know that inequalities of women get aggravated in later life. Worldwide, older women are much more likely than older men to provide unpaid care to their partners, grandchildren, or relatives. But older women take on the responsibility. They adapt, and they seldomly complain. The need to compensate periods of caregiving spent outside the workplace is gaining ground in some countries, notably through the introduction of care credits for pension accrual, This is particularly important in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, as women provided the bulk of additional caregiving responsibilities at home, which widened gender gaps in the labor participation and pay. Additionally, many older women are excluded from acquiring, accumulating, and controlling assets and property over their life course, including due to discriminatory inheritance regimes and practices. Many women reach older age with fewer savings, assets, and property, and lower social security, which significantly hinders them to their full enjoyment of their human rights. In at least 37 countries, women and men do not have equal rights to inherit assets from their spouses. This disadvantage put older women in a situation of heightened vulnerability to poverty, isolation, violence, abuse, and neglect. These disadvantages are exacerbated in crises and emergencies, as well both due to climate change, conflict, or pandemic, with the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination intensified during such situations. Older women face a particular risk of vulnerability to climate impacts, experiencing disproportionate health risks, and have higher rates of mortality from extreme heat waves. Despite available studies showing that women, including older women, are at increased risk of physical, sexual violence during emergencies, programs on sexual and gender-based violence in such settings often exclude them. We already heard about this. Thank you for mentioning it. In emergency settings, older women often provide intergenerational support and caregiving while also contributing to household income. Moreover, they play important roles in peace building and conflict resolution as carriers of pre-conflict narratives and experiences of shared living, countering extremist nationalist tendencies, preventing radicalization, and acting as repositories of knowledge about communities' dynamics. The intergenerational role of older women, as well as their extraordinary resilience in supporting and caring for others while dealing with economic adversity, is common but often overlooked. Indigenous women, older women in particular, are recognized for the important role they play as knowledge keepers in indigenous communities. When timely and quality gender data are available and used to inform policies and crisis recovery plans, countries can rebuild more effectively and more positively impact the lives of women. Producing data and disaggregating it by relevant levels, such as by sex, age, and other key characteristics, is essential to understanding the multiple social and economic roles of older women in their varied needs. The international human rights and policy frameworks provide robust guarantees and tools for the promotion and protection of women's rights, in particular with the Convention on the Elimination of Forms of Discrimination Against Women. However, the absence of a specific convention on the rights of older persons results in gaps in the protection of older women as a distinct group. The disproportionate impact of COVID-19 pandemic on older persons, and especially on older women, has shed light on the human rights protection gaps at the global level for this age group due to the absence of a comprehensive, legally binding international treaty. This mainly explains why older persons, and in particular older women, remain overlooked in policy-making decisions. More needs to be done to ensure a gender perspective to the human rights of older persons. Older women must be made visible in all instances, and that is why a legally binding instrument on older persons would help. It is crucial that the voices of older women be heard and their role and contributions to our society and communities recognized and valued. I look very much forward to hearing the reflections of my fellow panelists and learn from their perspectives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Claudia. And I do look forward to further conversation about that legally binding instrument and why the time is now. But Lorena.
Thanks to the NGO Committee on Aging for their invitation, and I salute observing all protocol, all the distinguished members of the panel. Allow me to start by sharing some data concerning climate change and environmental degradation by presenting the 5 major conclusions of the 6th IPCC report. Number 1, the window of opportunity is small and closing quickly to ensure a livable and sustainable future for all. For many places on the earth, adaptive capacities is already significantly limited. There is no place in the world that will not be affected by climate change. However, the regions that have contributed the least to the problem, notably Africa, Central America, South Asia, and small island states, will suffer some of the most severe consequences. 2, global net anthropogenic greenhouse gases emissions during the decade 2010 to 19 were higher than at any previous time in human history. 3, climate change is affecting more populations with less capacity to adapt. 4, the next generations will inherit a more wilderness planet than the one their mothers and fathers knew. People under the age of 10 at present are projected to experience a nearly 4-fold increase in extreme events at 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. 5, solutions based on nature. Nature can act as a climate solution. Of the 43 approaches to limit global warming, solar and wind energy stand out in 1st and 3rd place, respectively. In this context, where are we in relation to gender equality and women's empowerment? We need first to acknowledge that we have come a long way. In 2008, there was no mention of gender equality or women empowerment within the climate change discussions. To be honest, when we started building awareness and policy, it was extremely difficult. Today, only under the United Nations framework to combat climate change, we have almost 100 mandates. For the first time in history, all the financial mechanisms have either gender policies or plan of actions. And CSW 66 last March was devoted to this topic. Unfortunately, a specific reference to older women is absent from UNFCCC, the Paris Agreement, and other global climate change-related fora, including climate finance. Despite these international and regional frameworks, at present, many attempts to incorporate gender equality in climate change responses have been confined to simplistic, specific, and short-term technical interventions. When these have applied, they had failed to dismantle unequal power structures or to extern a structural impact or closing gender gaps. As a result, gender inequalities hindered sustainable development. Where poverty and inequality have deepened, the gender-differentiated impacts of climate change highlight what we call 4 structural knots of inequality, all pertinent to be analyzed from a women's elder position. Number 1, the socioeconomic inequality and the persistence of poverty. 2, the sexual division of labor and the unfair social organization of care. 3, predominance of the culture of privilege and patriarchal, discriminatory, and violent cultural patterns. And 4, the unequal concertation of power. It is not until recently that the need to comprehend an intersectionality of social constructions such as age and race are starting to be addressed. The need to understand the differential levers that created vulnerability is absent, primarily in policies and actions on the ground. For example, it was not until last year that the Human Rights Council requested a study on this matter. It is worthwhile pointing out that the effects are not only in older women in the Global South, where there is little to no data. For example, on the effects of food distribution among elders during food crises caused by climate change-related phenomena such as drought, or the impact of migration. Recently, in Europe and the US, we have learning more. Stories like the one from Kathleen Dortland facing temperatures over 100 degrees in Fresno, California, having to choose between the air conditioning or the oxygen machine that she needed. But older women were not only victims of climate change, were agents of change with valuable knowledge and skills, and therefore powerful leaders in the fight of climate change. However, it should be noted that older women were not an homogeneous group, and local gender roles are not immutable, nor can they be generalized. On paper, all of the above arguments and positions are undoubtedly the right ones. However, let me be realistic and pragmatic and ask ourselves, who will be the champions that will raise the voices of older, wise women in the context of climate change? We at the Kashak Institute are willing to join efforts with some of us that are here. Who funds older women to have their voices heard in climate change decision-making fora? While young people are rewarded for having positions in the face of this world reality, many older women who have been in this struggle for years are discharged, are useless. Let me conclude with the words of Ursula Le Guin. Before the moon, I am a woman of power, a woman's power, deeper than the roots of the trees, deeper than the roots of islands, older than the making, older than the moon. Thank you very much.
Just beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Lorena, for lifting up the voices of older women, and elevating and amplifying the need to examine intersectionality and the intentionality about intersectionality when it comes to climate change. Now we'll be joined via Zoom by Alana Officer. Welcome, Alana, and thank you.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Robin. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much to the organizers, and especially for enabling me to participate at a distance. Hello to all of my illustrious panel members. So being able, it's okay? Sound? Being able to enjoy health and well-being in later life is really, has an incredible impact on the opportunities that aging provides, but also in terms of the contributions that older people can make. And yet many older women experience their later lives in poor health and poor well-being. And we've heard we live longer than men, on average 2.9 years. We've heard that we account for 55.7% of persons aged 65 and older. And we've also heard already about the diversity of women in terms of their health and well-being, but in terms of all other aspects of our lives. And as Claudia mentioned, we heard about the fact that over the life course, we typically end up having fewer years in the workforce, we've earned less, we are less likely to have pensions, and we are less likely than men to have education, training, health services, and even the land that we've jointly toiled with our partners. And this event is about resilience. And resilience is about bouncing back from adverse events. Now, older women are incredibly resilient. They have had to be. But I question, can we stop expecting women to have to compensate and have to keep bouncing back because we have gaps in policies, gaps in our systems, gaps in our services, a lack of gender equity, in equal access in terms of having a voice, being listened to, and being able to be the agents of change that we truly are. Now, the decade of healthy aging is really intended to foster both longer and healthier lives and improve resilience through 4 areas. Tackling ageism, we've heard a lot about it, communities, building communities that are better places to grow older, developing integrated care, and ensuring we get long-term care when we need it. I want to explore those really briefly and how they impact on women and women's resilience. We've heard ageism. 1 in 2 people around the world are ageist against older people. ageism has devastating impacts on people's physical and mental health and costs individuals and societies billions. The research on the intersections between sexism and ageism in older age have found out that older women, relative to younger women and to older and younger men, bear the brunt of multiple forms of discrimination across sectors, employment, the media, healthcare, and we've also heard Carol speak so passionately in terms of climate change action. But we can reduce ageism, yeah? We can enhance older women's resilience and reduce their need to constantly have to fight back through policy and law, through intergenerational contact, and through enhancing educational activities. Now, many older women have quite significant healthcare needs and many unmet needs. Older women are much more likely than men to have chronic or multiple chronic health conditions. With age, bone mass or density tends to fall, particularly post-menopause, increasing our risk of osteoporosis, which has serious implications for disability, reduced quality of life, and mortality. Frailty is more common in women, specifically those from lower socioeconomic status. Not to forget, women are sexually active, and we also require ongoing sexual health care needs. But there are incredible disparities in older women's access to prevention care and treatment. Older men receive more thorough medical examinations, more follow-up, and more evidence-based medical care than women do. And men are also more likely to receive preventative care. But in this decade, we can improve health care for older women by providing person-centered integrated care as part of universal health coverage. One woman, one comprehensive healthcare plan that addresses all of our healthcare needs. The benefits are manifold to women and to the systems that are meant to support us, including reducing costs and improving healthcare outcomes. Long-term care, we need to make sure that all women and men get access to it in older age if they need it. But the need for care is much more prevalent among women, in part due to the healthcare issues that I just previously mentioned. And women make up the majority of caregivers, be they family members, neighbours, friends that provide care and support, or even paid care workers. And in older age, women continue to perform an enormous amount of unpaid care, caring for spouses and partners as well as grandchildren, and yet remain dependent on family members financially and economically. Long-term care is also within our power to improve by investing in long-term care, by ensuring that the long-term care workforce, women, paid and unpaid, is treated fairly and receives the social status and the recognition it deserves. Families need better support, for example, through flexible working arrangements, training and financial support. Now, the last priority on the decade can enable, if we invest, so creating communities that are better places to grow older, can enable women to age safely in a place that is right for them, to continue to develop personally, to be included, to contribute to their communities while retaining their autonomy and health. But we need greater opportunities for women to participate in society, to be more active in to have more leadership roles. We need to remove those systemic barriers such as ageism and sexism, as well as things like limited access to transportation and digital and financial literacy, as we previously heard. We need lifelong learning and training opportunities, particularly for older women in rural areas. And we need improved access to pensions and social protection with much better benefit levels and better coordination in emergency situations. Thousands of communities around the world are already working to make their places better places in which to grow older, but it's not enough. All communities in all countries in the world need to work to improve the health and well-being of older women and of older men. The decade provides an incredibly unique opportunity to improve the health and well-being of older women and hence maintain our resilience rather than undermine it. We also must celebrate the incredible, obviously, the contributions of older women. And it's fantastic to see Claudia on the panel. Last week, we celebrated the Healthy Aging 50. So leaders from local communities, civil society, academia, business, and different levels of government who are already helping to transform the world to be a better place in which to grow older. And women stood out as leaders in that Healthy Aging 50, with 36 of the 50 being women from across the world, showing that gender and less resource settings are no barrier to fostering health, well-being, and resilience in older age. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you so much for your remarks and your leadership. The decade of healthy aging holds so much promise to really call for the bold transformations that are needed. But now with our next two speakers, let's move to a regional perspective. And first we'll zoom in on Bilquis Tahara and her perspective from the front lines in Pakistan. So, of course, she's unable to join us, unfortunately, but she shared remarks on issues affecting the fundamental rights of people, and in particular, older women, in the backdrop of helplessness and hopelessness in third world governments and the oppressive macroeconomic climate. I will summarize and paraphrase from her remarks. And so, she shares with us, while I speak, the farmers from all over Punjab are protesting in Islamabad against the removal of subsidies on fertilizers, inordinately high costs of electricity that don't have the money to pay, and the tax adjustments that are hitting all so very hard. They're also demanding that the urea rate, which rose to 400% of its previous cost in the last 5 months, be reduced, and the rate of products such as sugarcane and wheat be rationed by the government, considering the cost of production, which has gone up by at least 200%. Many of the farmers protesting are older men. Negotiations have stalled, and more than half of Islamabad sealed by the authorities. The severe economic hardships of the people of Pakistan are a result of the current government's recalibration of IMF's 22nd loan to the government of Pakistan after the US-engineered regime change in Pakistan in April 2022. The two key conditions posed on the government before the next tranche of loan could be released included reducing user subsidies for fuel and electricity, which the government promptly responded by increasing the electricity tariff and steep hikes in petrol prices, as well as speeding up privatization of state-owned enterprises, which provide jobs to thousands of men and women workers. All this translated in women's terms, women have the main responsibility of running the household budget. Many older women, out of the 23 consulted for a focus group she held, shared, "Life has become very difficult for us. We feel utterly helpless." Our analysis reveals that the impact of neoliberal policies of IMF on women's lives has severely curtailed their capacity for social reproduction and adversely impacted their access to fundamental rights. Pakistan is into its 22nd loan program since 1958. The loans have mostly been accompanied by a neoliberal structural adjustment based on privatization, deregulation, curtailing subsidies, limiting social sector spending, regressive taxation, and other such steps. This quote-unquote financial support was supposed to reduce poverty. However, research tells us that it has actually widened the rights and access gaps between the rich and the poor, and the policies were actually making the richer richer and the poorer poorer. IMF's poverty reduction discourse includes devolution of power, participation of the civil society, empowerment of the poor, the challenge of inclusion, good governance, and transparency. However, the economic conditions have not achieved much of either of those stated objectives. Poverty has actually grown. As stated in the government's and other analysts' reports, in fact, the contradiction between the IMF's neoliberal globalization agenda and its sociological objectives inherently oppose each other. The force of structural adjustments in Pakistan since the 80s has practically foreclosed the possibility of any significant reduction in poverty. With the government responding to IMF's conditions in the past 5 months, inflation has increased over double. Dollar exchange rate has greatly increased, and so have petrol prices. We know that the progressive taxation regime is counterbalanced by general sales tax and excise tax. The general sales tax is increased on household consumption, cooking oil, toothpaste, food, all basic needs. The rise in petrol prices by almost 80% has resulted in higher travel costs, particularly for the poor and women traveling on buses. Raises in energy tariffs means higher electricity costs, burdening household budgets. Indeed, this has resulted in worsening inequality and poverty by raising household expenditures, especially in terms of transportation, cooking, and heating, and by increasing the production costs of many items, especially food. And this is having a disproportionate impact on low-income groups, especially women in poorer households. Among these groups, although all members have mobilized their efforts to support households so as to cope with the economic crisis, women have to bear an unequal share of the burden because of the hidden equilibration factor in their ability to absorb the shocks of stabilization programs. Through more work and making do, as women always do, on limited incomes and households, shifting the costs from the state to women. Thus, the process of state resource reallocation is dependent on the positive response of the female labor within the household and in the labor market. Women have to give this response by providing their physical and financial contribution in the household economy, as they're supposed to play the primary role in household survival strategies, stretching their dollars, stretching their labor to make ends meet. When those household resources don't match, it's the women that have to bridge the gap, lengthening and intensifying their labor in the labor market. The older women consulted in the work Bilquis has done mention several grave negative points of impact on their lives faced by these consequences. The first is the emotional stress they go through as they see their sons and daughters make difficult choices to make ends meet, such as stopping girls' education as resources are starved in the household, less food, lowering nutritional status, particularly of the girls around the kitchen table, parents insisting that schoolwork be finished in the daylight, curtailing their play because of the cost of electricity, all feeling helpless that they cannot make a difference, feeling depressed. The second is very limited access to health services, which are faced by members of households as the cost increased to have transportation. As a result, older women are most affected as their trips to the health facilities means double the cost in mobility charges. The cost of medicine has gone up, making it all the more discouraging to access health services. Many shared they don't even tell their family, silently sacrificing and going without when they are unwell. The third is the extra burden of caregiving, since many women have to go out of the home to find low-paid skill work to augment the income in the household. Children are left in the care of elderly women who cannot match the children's energy and feel exhausted after a few hours of care work. Gathering firewood has also become the responsibility of older women as the household cannot afford the kerosene oil for cooking. They have to collect and carry heavy loads, and it takes them at least double the amount of time it would take a younger person. In brief, it all falls on the shoulders of women to supplement the household income, stretching the pennies, undertaking additional work, and expectations from older women are that they'll also carry the burden as a member of the household. This demonstrates some of these global developments have not helped to improve the situation, but have intensified the social and economic hardship older women have faced. Bilquis recommends that the IMF and other international financial institutions move away from the fiscal consolidation-centered approach to human rights and gender equality-based macroeconomics. Strange as the idea may seem initially, conceptualization of an economic theory that is gender just and poor friendly is possible, and expertise exists. A network of feminist economists can be established to work on this conceptualization and develop and implement mechanisms. All other economic theories would then be subservient to human rights and gender equality goals, and will have to adjust to survive. Inspirational remarks and truly an illustration of the resilience Bilquis has to share and capture these sentiments while she's navigating the devastation of Pakistan herself. So thanks to Bilquis. But Carol, let's move to the region of Africa.
Thank you, Ramsey, and thank you to the NGO Committee on Aging for the invite. And as I begin to share about the abuse and neglect of older women in select countries under this theme of resilience, I want to just say a couple of things. One, the way resilience is framed for older women presents a disconnect between the cultural pretensions and the reality. Because in Africa, older women are supposed to be cared for, they're supposed to be nurtured, appreciated, because they've gone through life, they've given a lot to the community. But the reality is very different. In many instances, they're seen to have nothing new to offer, even if they thrived in their younger ages and contributed to their families. They're also seen as a burden, and they should also, on the other hand, quietly bear the burden of their communities through childcare, providing support to their families, especially those who live outside of the rural communities where a lot of older women are found. In disasters, and these have been quite a few, older women are not expected to compete with younger women who are seen as more deserving for the scarce services that are provided in such situations, including humanitarian settings. And then older women are generally seen as a burden to the society. So the resilience of older women is seen in that frame, and yet they are supposed to stand tall and support and provide for their families. So if we look at the socioeconomic and cultural drivers of violence against women, older women, one, we see that we have age-blind systems and services, such as health. So you find that older women then do not get the services they require. They're not able to take care of their health. And this adds on to the cycle of violence and abuse. Older women are excluded from decision-making on matters that concern them. We have a widespread poverty, and there is a failure to acknowledge the power and the agency of older women, so they're not seen as being able to bring anything to the table. So the potential of their agency is completely untapped, and we have widespread ageism. So I'll speak about two cases. One is witch burning in Kenya, and the other one is allegations of witchcraft in Ghana. In Kenya, we have older women in 3 communities among the Kisii, the Mijikenda, and the Kamba, where because there's a struggle for scarce land and other resources, older women who have sight problems or who suffer dementia are seen as witches, and when anything happens in the community, they are blamed. In October last year, we had the unfortunate case of 4 women being lynched, and this was all about land, but they were seen to be witches. And this is something that has gone on for a very long time. It is not just starting now. If we compare to Ghana, where 10 women have been labeled witches since March 2022, and these are just the ones that are known, the cases that are reported. We know that the numbers are a lot higher. We have 6 camps in Ghana where these women are then secluded for their protection, quote unquote, but this just ends up exacerbating the loneliness that they suffer. As of 2018, up to 1,000 women were in these camps that act as a refuge for them, but some of them are taken there out of matters beyond their control, similar to Kenya, where we have issues such as dementia. A woman loses her way back from the farm, and she's then labeled as a witch and scattered off to Gambaga, where the camps are. So we need to move from rhetoric to action. We cannot keep talking about the resilience of older women. Older women have gone through life, and overcome gender discrimination, gendered poverty, and the brutality of the patriarchal structures that then put them to the periphery of the society. When they reach old age, there's an expectation that this would end, but this does not. It continues. So we need to begin to dismantle the structures that perpetuate the violence, abuse, and neglect of older women on the basis simply of the fact that they have grown older. We need to resist the resilience rather than celebrate it, because in celebrating resilience, we're only bringing forth we're just perpetuating the abuse that they have suffered. And I think it's Annette who said that resilience does not always defeat repression. So we cannot expect that we will change if we keep building the resilience of women. Older women, we need to dismantle the structures that force them to be resilient in the first place. So how do we move from rhetoric to action? One is documentation and evidence, because I've spoken about the number 10 women in Ghana and a few in Kenya, but we know that the numbers are much more. We need to document these cases and use it to be able to now influence the change that we want to see. We need to have an intergenerational and intersectional, as well as a multi-sectoral approach, because the young people today are older people in waiting. So we cannot then operate as if the old people just happened to be old. So we need an intergenerational approach. We need to strengthen systems on the basis of the civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights of women. We cannot exclude one set of rights, because we know that rights are intersectional and they're also interdependent as well. And we need to fully embrace a rights-based approach so that we prioritize the implementation of the rights that already exist. And as Claudia said, and several other speakers have said today, we need a UN Convention on the rights of older people, but we also need to push for the implementation of the existing laws and rights. And when the UN Convention comes into force, then we must also push for its implementation. So civil societies must act for the speedy enactment of laws and policies at the national levels. At the African Union level, we have an AU protocol on the rights of older persons. We need to advocate for its speedy ratification and entry into force. And we also need to bridge the qualitative and quantitative data gaps that exist so that we inform the advocacy. There's a lot of blindness around what older people are faced up with, especially older women. But again, at the risk of repetition, every young woman in this space is an older woman in waiting, and we cannot expect that we will be quiet and allow the younger women to also step into old age with the same kinds of biases and discrimination that the older women are currently facing. And we must also support the special mechanisms such as the open-ended working group and Claudia's mandate, because it is only through this that we will be able to move the needle the way we should. So with that, I would say that let us, again, dismantle these structures. Older women have no business being resilient when they have gone through a life of gender discrimination, gender violence, patriarchal systems that completely put them against the rest of the community, against men. And in the keynote address, we saw the disparities. Why do we expect older women to just take that all in when they should actually be easing out of life in a way that is not as violent as they have come through. So I'll end with that, and thank you once again for the invitation. Thank you.
Carol, thank you for your reframing of the issue of resilience and the true need to restructure the policy as opposed to continuing to expect that resilience as we age. But let's open it up. We've got some great questions here. I don't know that we'll have time to get to all of them, but Alana, let's start with you. Really, what we're talking about here is the intersection between ageism and sexism. Can you share with us some examples of this double jeopardy and how it impacts women's resilience? Or, to Carol's point, the need to restructure the policies?
Thanks very much. Well, I think we just heard an excellent example, actually. I think the intersection between ageism and sexism that Carol just spoke to on the accusations of witchcraft and discrimination directed to older women is a classic example. You know, in terms of sub-Saharan Africa, we're not hearing accusations of witchcraft or wizardcraft or whatever against older men. It's all directed towards older women, where older women are being persecuted for causing ill health, disease, or death, and so being ostracized and neglected. That's an example. An example that most of us face, a very simple example, is around physical appearance of older women. We judge differently to older men, very simply. Men with grey hair and wrinkles are seen as distinguished, are seen as wise and experienced, whereas grey hair and wrinkles are considered to be unattractive in women. Something so simple in terms of our appearance. We face so much more pressure to try and hide or change who we are, yeah? Whether it be through hair dye or anti-aging products, and you know, and the impacts in terms of cost on those sort of things. I spoke previously around access to healthcare, where women don't receive the same levels of evidence-based healthcare as men do, don't receive the same levels of preventative healthcare. In media, we see that women are not even visible. I mean, you know, women are far less likely to be represented in media than men. So I could go on. There are so many examples of the intersection, I think, in terms of sexism and ageism.
From the audience, why are older women's issues often forgotten in so many of the global reports and deliberations, and in particular the UN reports? Now, you mentioned your second report focused on older women. So tell us about that why, and speak to why they're often forgotten.
So one thing I also mentioned before is data. And maybe I could also come back to ageism and sexism. The data missing on sexual violence is one of the ageist and sexist things I ever came across. So I think this is one thing where we also see if we don't have the data, the people are not there, they are not visible, so they are not taken into account. Another thing is strategic plans. If older women are missing in strategic plans, they will not show up in the reports. So let me state like this, if there are no priorities in the measures, if there are no priorities in politics and strategics, they will not show up in the next reports, and we will still miss them there. I think I'll leave it here. I think these are the major things I came across during the last couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Well, let's pull on one of those threads there, violence, abuse, and neglect. And Carol, would love to hear a little bit more about the drivers of violence, abuse, and neglect of older women in Africa, and how it manifests, and tell us about your work.
Thank you, Ramsey. I think I mentioned a bit of it, the socioeconomic drivers. And I think Alana has also just talked about how we view aging for men and women differently. When an old man in Africa marries 2 other wives in old age, it is not a problem at all. And that then exacerbates poverty, because you're now starting a family at the age of 60, you have another family, you're not able to take care of them. So what happens is that the older wife, if she's present, is then cast to the periphery. That's just one very stereotypical example. The other issue is that if you look at the retirement policies in a lot of countries in Africa, they don't favor older people at all, both men and women. But women are favored, men are favored disproportionately because it's easier for a man to get access to work or even a consulting work, whether it's labor, manual labor, or consulting work, the two ends of the divide. It is easier for a man to get that than it is for a woman, for many reasons. Even if it's not the intellectual capacity, you're looking at the issues of security, you're looking at issues of their mobility, you're also looking at issues of access to the services that they will need in that later age that become very kind of reduced significantly for women as opposed to men. Mobility in Africa, a lot of the roads don't, rural areas don't have tarmac roads, for example, and you have the mode of transport as being the motorbikes. It's easier for a man to ride on a motorbike at any age than it is for a woman at any age, and less so for an older woman. So if that's a mode of transport that will get you to your economic activity, then the woman would rather stay at home because it's easier then for the man to do so. The other drivers are, which I had mentioned already, are the failure to acknowledge the power of women. So you find decision-making processes will include older men. So you have sittings of older men. In Kenya, for example, they're called baraza, which is a sitting of older men. But where are the sitting of older women? And they have something to bring to the table. So the exclusion happens at many levels. And this then causes women to build their resilience because then the levels of violence, economic, physical, and other violence that plays out in the examples that I've given.
You must be in the room. You need to be in the room where it happens. So Lorena, talk to us about some of the main reasons for the lack of recognition of older adults in the context of climate change. And are there ways we can work together with younger generations across life course so all generations of women's issues can be addressed in climate change?
Thank you, Ramsey, and thank you for that question. I think the problem, we have to start first to acknowledging that people, human beings, are not very well addressed when it comes to the environmental sector. They think that the problems that we're facing are due to a suicide feeling of the environment itself, but they need to understand that there is an interlinkages between human beings and environment. So let's start with that has not been very clear. And definitely, we have been giving little steps in acknowledging gender equality and women empowerment, but the part of intersectionality is not there. And we do need to work with the younger generations. However, some of the younger generations have a feeling, and I can express it once during Rio +20. I mean, Rio happened some years ago. The youth had a T-shirt that says, "Were you in Rio?" And I said, yes. And they turned around and said, "What are you doing here then?" A disregard completely about the value of older people can have. They do blame that a lot of the problems, and they're right, that says that a lot of the problems that we're facing on environmental degradations are due to older people. So there is a lot of work to be done there, that there is a lot of bridges that needs to be built in that sense. And again, there are tremendous amount of resources and funds and research that is going to go on the differentiated impacts of environmental degradation and climate change in different age groups. But on people over 60, as far as I know, there is no effort at the moment being conducted.
Well, and thank you for calling out, and I'll take, Carol, your words. We must stop discriminating against our future selves. We have to see ourselves as we age and ensure all can age well. But let's look at a human rights instrument, Claudio. What do you think a dedicated human rights instrument on older persons would do? How would it make a difference for women in particular?
Thank you. I think a dedicated human rights instrument focusing on human rights in later life would first of all raise awareness that there is a group which is fully overlooked in the human rights framework. Second, it would also give guidance to states, to governments, how to implement these rights better and how really to implement these rights, because if we only refer to the covenant, it's not very concrete. And we saw very specifically with, for example, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that specific norms give guidance how to implement best. In regard of older women, what we have seen now on the regional levels, it was also mentioned from Carol, that we have an African protocol, we also have an Inter-American Convention already, which has specific focus on older women, which also, I think, will raise awareness that meaningful participation is now or never, and it needs to be done with older women. So as said before, give them room, let them in the room, let them speak, let them give their space, their views. They're the best advocates for their needs. They're the best advocates what they can do and what is really needed on the national, regional, and international level. So I think a human rights convention on the specific rights of persons in later life would give the perfect guidance, the framework for all of us to better implement the human rights of older persons. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. And we'll go ahead and end on that note. And here to that sentiment, given the criminal outcomes of the pandemic in regard to older adults, today's sobering, powerful wake-up call in regard to the contributions, the resilience, and still the inequities older women experience, now is the time to shore up older adults' rights as the human rights they are with the convention. The resilience and contributions of older women are truly monumental and essential to the societal and economic health of our society, of our economy, never mind the backbone of our communities, of our families, the connective tissue that keeps it all together. It's time to honor that contribution and that lived experience of older women. For far too long, older women have been invisible, have not been in that room where it happens. And today's discussion illustrates it's time to make a change. As the late, great Maggie Kuhn, the founder of the Grey Panthers, said, "Don't agonize, organize." Together, we need to call for a change. It's time and it's long overdue. At the National Council on Aging, we like to say aging well should be a right, not a privilege experienced by the few. To ensure all women can age well, we must take on the blatant ageism and sexism that holds all of us back. It's time to put older women at the center, not the sidelines of policy development. Our grandmothers deserve better, our mothers deserve better, our daughters deserve better, we all do. Thank you so much for today's rich conversation. Let's make that change together. Thank you, panel.
That was just tremendous. Really, really great. Anybody here proud to be an older woman or supporter of an older woman? Raise your hand. Woo, woo. Thank you. Really, really some great thoughts and grist for the mill to move forward in action. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Masumi Ono, the chief, I love the name of your division, chief of the Social Inclusion and Participation Branch at the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs. It doesn't get any better than that. In the interest of time, I will yield the floor, but I will say that you are an excellent example. You clearly set the tone for your division just by virtue of the work and the collaboration and collegiality that we've experienced in planning this event. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robin, for your kind words. We are deeply grateful to you and your team for fostering a spirit of collaboration and partnership in planning every stage of this event. And we share the joy of finally commemorating the International Day of Older Persons in person. I would like to thank the speakers and moderator for a vibrant and thought-provoking discussion. There's so much to take away from today's exchange, but one thing is clear. To build resilience and sustainability, recognizing and giving due credit to the contributions of older women at work, at home, in communities, as well as including their voices, perspectives, and needs on all aspects of our lives, are critical at all levels in all countries. At the UN, we have seen the committed engagement of member states in the work on aging and older persons, led by Argentina as the chair of General Assembly Open-Ended Working Group on Aging, and by Chile on behalf of the Group of Friends of Older Persons. We also heard the interventions from many member states at last week's general debate of the Third Committee. That engagement is what propels the UN, and in particular DESA, to deliver on our mandate fully and focus on the road ahead. But we do need more. I therefore wish to take this opportunity to thank all older persons at this event and beyond, who are and have been so determined in working to promote and build a future of security, opportunity, and dignity for people of all ages. Carrying your voices into the global discussions at the United Nations is truly vital to ensuring the protection and empowerment of older persons everywhere. As you know, this year marks the 20-year milestone of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. The fourth global review and appraisal of its implementation will take place at the Commission for Social Development in February next year. 104 countries in the world actively participated in this exercise by submitting voluntary national reports. I ask that you stay tuned for the report of the Secretary General to be issued later this year, which will highlight the conclusions and identify emerging issues as well as related policy options. In closing, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to Her Excellency Ambassador Maria del Carmen Scaife, and His Excellency Mr. René Ruiz Diaz-Perez for their support in sparing no effort to strengthen the protection of the human rights of older persons. I also wish to extend my appreciation to the NGO Committee on Aging in New York under the leadership of its chair, Cynthia Stewin, and Vice Chair Francis Zainadine, and in particular the preparations for organizing today's event, spearheaded by Robin Fendley, with support from Erica Dar, Maud Bruce-About, Magda Kazmarska, and Anna Staber. We look forward to our continued collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Masumi. We really appreciate the support and encouragement. So this is where we wrap it up, everybody. It's been quite a day, really providing an excellent snapshot of what we as women experience, regardless of our country of origin. There's much to say, but I think in the interest of time, I will jump to some of the key things. A special thanks again. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. This is really, we appreciate that. To all the sponsors and the financial supporters of the event, to DESA, the Committee on Aging Planning Committee, and everybody who's joined us in person and online. If you know anybody who has missed the event, I'm told that this will be recorded and will be available at the UN website shortly. Please come join our Committee on Aging. The brochure is in your folder. But I want to say, too, we recognize, we hear this stuff about government, and government is so much bigger than us, and government is bigger than us. But what we can do is start right where we are. And so take one thought that you've heard today, make it your own, and share it with others around you. And little by little, the word gets around, the ideas begin to change. And it's really about seeing women's strength in dismantling the walls, the barriers that we've been hearing all about, and living, right? And working really towards creating that more just and socially inclusive world. It seems like everybody has quotes from significant women, and I actually do as well. The anthropologist Margaret Mead has said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And so thank you very much. On your way out, please go out. You have to go up on the 3rd floor to exit due to security concerns. Thank you so much. Go out and let's rock it. We can do it. Yes, we can.